So, good morning. We are super excited for our guest today. She has a wonderful story, and we met her through Instagram, actually. She reached out to us about our podcast, and we had a great talk on the phone. And I'll let you tell I'll let her tell her story. And let me introduce Anne Marie Morello.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here.
Glad you're here.
So yes, I had seen on Instagram the podcast, and I had listened before to some other adoptee podcasts like Adoptees On, and I got hooked very easily. One session, I kind of binge listened to all your sessions and reached out. And, so my story, I was a domestic closed adoption born on Long Island, New York, where I've lived and, stayed here my whole life. And I was surrendered. So my circumstances of my adoption, what my adopted parents knew was that, was an unwanted pregnancy. They gave some ages of my birth mother and my birth father, which later I found out were altered. The ages made them older than they were, which was interesting. But I had my non-identifying, my entire life, and had always wanted to search from a very young age. I had always been told I was adopted. I have an older brother who's 9 years older. He's also adopted. We're not biological siblings. So our whole lives, which I appreciate that so much, that my parents told us, even though, a young age, 2 or 3, you don't fully understand what that means, but they always let us know that we were special. We used to celebrate the day of our adoption. We called it our anniversary. So we would have some type of cake or something to commemorate the day that we became a family. So, so as far as born in Long Island, had looked on and off. This is before the internet, before ancestry.com, before DNA, where you would try to put information into your computer and see if you could find it. I didn't have a last name for my birth mother or a first name. I only had my date of birth. It was very difficult. And the fact that New York has closed records, and I wasn't born in New York City, which has that big birth book where you can search by your birth certificate number, I was really stuck.
And what age did you start looking?
I think more so teenage years. I think the desire to want to look was probably from 9 or 10 years old. But then I think I really fully wanted to look when I was the teenage years, those difficult years of who am I, trying to find out who you are. And then being adopted just added a whole nother level into it. So I would probably say early teens.
Did you feel like you had abandonment issues?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. As much as I felt a part of my family, because the family that I was raised in, Italian American, and my first family is Italian American. So I did have those similarities. And I came from a big, loud Italian family. We're all in each other's faces and business and all that, but in a good way, a lot of cousins. But I did feel, for most of my life that something was missing. And I just wanted the answers. I'm curious by nature. I've always been. Mm-hmm. I think I'm fascinated by people, and that definitely helps me in the work that I do. But I just wanted to know who I look like, even though I look like my adopted father. In fact, it's interesting. People will be like, oh my gosh, you look so much like your dad. We both have the green eyes and we look very similar. So that's, we kind of chuckle about that. Like it's an inside joke. I don't know, if it's someone doesn't know. But I think that, I had those feelings of why didn't she want me? Like, what was the circumstances that? And I created it in my head, that ghost kingdom of what I fantasized about what the circumstances were. But my non-identifying had given some clues to information. It had said that it was, an unplanned pregnancy and that the relationship had ended when the pregnancy was confirmed. So I think I had this narrative my entire life that my birth dad was not a great guy, that, he had gotten my birth mother pregnant and then had left, which I come to find out later was not the case at all. But I had that idea in my head.
Yeah. Like a painted picture that this is the guy that's wronged her. And
right.
Yeah. And then Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so then what, so you carried on, and then when did you start the search in a serious way where you were able to get some answers?
So I think the search, was ongoing. There were definitely periods where I was like full force, I'm going to do this, and you're all energized. And then other times, you get so many times where you're told you can't have this information and you're not allowed to have this information, and it gets to you. So then there were years where I just didn't look. I just couldn't. It was too painful that I had to kind of tuck that away and say, I'm not going to do it. And then I would start picking it up again. I think it became more so, in my relationship with my husband. We met, I was 17, he was 18. So he's been on this ride with me from the very beginning. I mean, I was in therapy and, when we met and before we had met. And my therapist at the time, for what I was going to speak to her about, said, I think this has a lot to do with what you're talking about with your adoption, more so than what you think you're coming here for. So I really credit that social worker that I met with when I was an early teen for kind of telling me about support groups. And I actually went to an adoption and birth mother support group called Crossroads in this church.
Wow.
I was 17 years old. I dragged my husband with me. For me, it was a test, to see if he was going to go with me. Like, this is so much a part of me. It's either going to scare you that you're going to say, I'm out of here, or he's going to stick around. And he did stick around. So I remember we went there and he was really supportive, and it was like a once a month thing. It was also painful because I would come home and my adopted mom, as much as she said she was understanding, she really was very hurt by the fact that I wanted to look.
Yeah.
And now in the work that I do as a therapist, I understand that it shined a light on the fact that there was infertility with my parents. And it really, was making them uncomfortable in that way. So, we went to the group. My husband came with me, not every month, but, I brought him with me. And I think that, that kind of opened it up, that I wanted to find out more. Because as I listened to these birth mother stories, and some of them are heartbreaking, and how much they wanted, I was like, wow, what if she's out there looking for me? Like, just as much as I want this, to fill a void and to feel some understanding, she might feel the same way. And then when we got married and had children, my oldest son was having learning issues in school, and we were like, where is this coming from? And I didn't have my health information. We have 2 boys. So every pregnancy, every doctor's visits, adoptees, we get that question, what's your family history? And then when you say I'm adopted, the physician usually gives you the head tilts, kind of like, oh, they feel sorry for you. And it was very frustrating. So that kind of spurred me, like, I need this information. I'm entitled. This is my truth, my birthright. I want to have the answers, if nothing else, if not a relationship, at least the answers. So I went to court to try to get my records open because of my son and his difficulties in school and things that he was going. And I remember going to court. It was the year after 9/11. It was on September 11th, the following year, and going to court and standing up and not ever being asked a question other than swearing into who my name was, leaving there, the judge saying there's not enough of a medical necessity to open this.
Oh my
My
God.
attorney, who had done like 6 other adoptee cases, turned to me and said, you're the first case I've ever lost. And I was I was so frustrated, so feeling rejected once again.
I'd be so angry. God.
Like,
These
I'm
are
a grown woman,
lives.
adult, right? And so that was kind of a roadblock. But I think my just tenacity of like, I'm not going to give up on this because it's so important, propelled me. And then certainly once Ancestry DNA came out and, more things with the internet, it made it a lot easier. So, that was definitely opened up a door for me.
Did you have, when your son was born, your first son, did you have that overwhelming feeling of finally having a biological connection to someone?
I did. I remember, it was an emergency C-section. So just that, I had an uneventful pregnancy, and then, got the Pitocin to speed up labor, and something was going wrong. All of a sudden there's all these doctors and nurses at my bedside, and they're like, turn over this way, turn over that way. and the next thing I know, I'm being whisked into the operating room. So that was very scary of not knowing. It ended up being a placental abruption, which, his oxygen level went down and his heart rate went down and he was in distress. I was in distress. So feeling disconnected, that I never thought I was going to have a C-section, because
I had the same thing.
I had an uneventful pregnancy. Like
Yeah,
that
me
happened
too.
to somebody else. That doesn't happen to me.
Me too.
And then them taking him right away and not getting to see him for more than a second.
Yeah, it's like a minute. You're like, okay, bye.
And this was before smartphones. So they took a Polaroid picture of him that, they could show me. And it's like, he's like just born and not getting to see him for a couple of hours because I was in recovery. So that, to me, I was dealing with that feeling of loss, of this wasn't the birth experience that I had hoped for, anticipated. Then when I finally got to see him, he had this bright red hair. And we were like, where does that come from? Like, my husband's Sicilian, Italian, dark hair. My hair is dark brown. I mean, I was lighter when I was younger, but we're like, this is interesting. So that was, and of course, everyone's looking at the baby saying, well, who does he look like? And I remember my mother-in-law came to the hospital and she was like, oh my gosh, Anne Marie, she's like, he is you. She's like, he is a mini version of you. And it was so emotional. I was hysterical. The nurses are coming in and they're, like, oh, it's the hormones. And then my husband's like, no, you don't understand. She's adopted. He's like, this is the first person that she can look and see a mirror image of herself. So I think that was.
I love that he knew that, I love that he was on this journey with you.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I mean, we've been together 35 years and married 29 years. So we've grown up, and he's, been on this whole crazy ride with me, which is nice.
So you leave the judge. Now I'm doing a
so
back
I
and forth
leave
in
the judge.
time.
Yeah. So I leave the judge and, we didn't get any sooner. I mean, my son he's in college and he's doing beautifully and he's getting ready to graduate from college. So we're able to get the services, but it was just very frustrating. Like we just couldn't pinpoint more than a learning disability, what was the cause or what might've happened. And then in 2007, well, I guess it was Ancestry I did early, like 2015. I'm in the midst of graduating from graduate school, becoming a licensed mental health counselor was a later in life career change for me. I was in the business world and business management, worked for an insurance company, and I wanted to go back and do something differently. And it was that caring profession that I wanted to somehow make that shift. And I had always had an interest in nursing. So I had thought about going back to school for that. And then when I thought I have to start all over from square one with, biology and chemistry, I was like, I'll be 90 years old before I get out of school. So I remember I volunteered for a hospital on Long Island, and I was in the ambulatory surgery unit for a year. And because people were waiting for their loved ones to come out of surgery, a lot of times I would just be sitting there with family members, who needs tissues, like they're checking in, let me see if your loved one's come out yet. And I was like, I want to do this. So I said, how can I do this? And it was counseling. And I said, I'm going to go back very part-time and just kind of take a class. My boys were younger. And then it turned into like one class, turned into two. And then I got my degree. But of course, in school, especially psychology fields, all these things about attachment and your family and development trauma comes out. So I was like, oh my gosh, you're throwing yourself into it. And I've always been the only adoptee in a lot of those settings. I have some adopted friends, but no one that was a therapist or kind of got it from that vantage point. So I had put something on Facebook that, I was looking to find more information because I had been interviewed for a show that used to be on. I think it was like Find My Family or something.
Oh, yeah.
And they had interviewed me and they were like, oh, we'll get back in touch. And it was like Shed Media, I think, or something. And I never heard back. And I remember I was getting ready to graduate school. And some of my people I work with at the practice while I was intern had written letters on my behalf, like, she doesn't want this for notoriety. She just wants to find out where she came from and her roots and her children, which was very nice. It didn't end up working out, but me putting something on Facebook, just kind of talking about my disappointment in how this had turned out. Someone I went to high school saw the message and private messaged me and said, I have this friend who hired this genealogist searcher who's also adopted. You know, she's the real deal. Like, you know, she said, like, why don't you've done all these other things and tried to find out why not. So I said, all right, you know, expecting like this isn't going to work. You know, I'm not a pessimistic person, but you get rejected so many times. You're like, all right, let's see if maybe this one will stick.
I
And I
love that
did.
it's the power of social media. You know, it's like just putting one thing out there all
Yeah.
these years later.
And I didn't put a lot of detail because it's
Hmm.
not as if I was putting like my whole heart out there and putting everything. Because a lot of
Yeah.
people that I'm connected with on Facebook are my family members,
Oh.
which they are my family. And they know I've wanted to look, it's no secret, but it just was very private. And then I contacted, you know, this individual, and I remember it was like Columbus Day weekend, you know, you have the holiday off from work, and I'm at Staples with a big, huge file of like all my years of searching. Cause when we spoke on the phone, she had said, send me everything you have, like every
Oh.
clue, every login for Ancestry, like even if it's a scratch of paper where you made a phone call, just send it to me. And, you know, even if you think it's not going to mean anything, I was like, okay. So I was literally at my spread out on the table at Staples, like all my private, like, it's like, you know, you feel like you're naked. You're like, everything's out there. Anybody that comes by, it's like, what's that? Photocopying, you know, expressed it to her. I wrote a little note with it with some pictures, even though I know she gets it because she's adopted.
Hmm.
I just wanted to make it personal, you know, and at the time I had a license plate that was my truth was on my license plate. So I took a screenshot of the license plate and I was like, these are the reasons I want to do it. And, you know, I'm hoping that you can help me. So that was a Monday. Wednesday, she emailed me and asked me like one or two questions. So I was like, okay, she's working on it. And then Friday, I was working at a mental health agency as a recovery coach, and I'm at work and I get this email, and it's the searcher saying, okay, your search is complete. Like, here's how we arrange the payment as the wire transfer. And I'm like, what? I was like, 3 days? Like, she didn't get my package till Wednesday. And this was Friday. So I
Wow.
remember going out to my car and calling my husband, and I was like, where are you? And he's like, I'm in a meeting. Is everything okay? I was like, you need to go to the bank. I was like, you need to send, like, she has the information. He's like, okay. So he did that. And then that night, it was her birthday too, coincidentally. She's like, I'm out to dinner with my family. Like, I want to put it all together and tidy it up for you. If you want, I can do it like quickly, or I could do it tomorrow. And I was like, you know what? I've waited. At that point, it was, you know, 49 years of waiting. So I was like, one
Yeah.
more night is not going to throw me over the top. But I had some crazy dreams that night
Oh,
before.
I'm sure.
I barely slept, and they were very weird, vivid, like dreams of places and things like that. And then the next day, you know, she sent me the email, and she's like, after you've had a chance to process what I've sent you, call me and I'll tell you how to make contact with your birth mother. And that's what I did. I remember sitting there reading it and rereading it, and like, oh my gosh, I have names and so many intersections, coincidences of where my first family was around me my whole life on Long Island, sometimes living in the same town as me. And I didn't even know it. I probably could have passed them on the street.
That's crazy. We hear a lot of this actually with the proximity of how close people are sometimes. And so did you reach out to her? How did that go?
So yes, I reached out. You know, I was given a phone number, landline number, a cell phone number. The cell phone number didn't work. It was like a fast, busy signal. So I'm like, oh, this is like an old number or something. And the landline was an answering machine. And I was like, I can't leave this message on the answering machine, because my searcher had said she didn't recommend a letter because she felt like sometimes letters get intercepted and it might not go to the intended person.
Mm.
And sending a certified letter, she might think there's some type of legal action or something, you know, might be kind of off-putting. So I was like, okay, what am I doing now? So I reached back out. I kind of told her, I left a very vague message just saying like, oh, I saw an obituary that your dad, meaning my maternal grandfather, had passed. So sorry to hear that. I'm trying to locate someone, like, and I just said Anne Marie and gave my number. It probably sounded so sketchy. I don't know. I don't even know what I said. I think I blanked out a little bit there. And I didn't hear anything. And I was like, oh no, what if this dies here? Like, here I've done this, and what if it doesn't go any further?
Yeah.
I was like, I kind of knew her siblings' names from the obituary where someone had died and it lists all the family members.
Hmm.
So I got on the
Do you have an
computer.
address?
I had an address for, yeah, my birth mom. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, I'm going to contact one of these siblings and see if I can just get a message to her. And that's what I did. I contacted, two siblings have passed. So the only living sibling, the youngest sister, I called and it was a landline number and she picked up the phone. And I was like, hi, my name's Anne Marie. Is this an okay time to talk? And I think she thought I was trying to sell something. Like I
Yeah.
hear the music on the background, when you get those calls 8:30 at night and you're like, what? And I said, is this an okay to time? It's kind of a sensitive nature. And she's listening. And I said, I'm trying to get a message to so-and-so. And she got really nervous thinking that my birth mother had been in some kind of like horrific car accident
Oh,
or something. And I was calling and I was like, no, nothing's wrong. She's okay. I'm like, I guess she's okay. I don't know her. And I said to her, and she's like, well, what is this about? She's very suspicious. I said, well, I have reason to believe that so-and-so, your sister, is my birth mother. I was born on, I gave her my birth date. And she's like, well, okay. And then I said, can you tell her that the name that she gave me was Tracy Jean? And she goes, what is that, a clue? And I said,
uh,
yeah, it's a clue to validate I am who I say I am. I said, can you get a message to her? So she said, okay, I'll get a message, but I'm not going to see her. Like I'm traveling. So it's going to be about a month. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I was like, okay, I appreciate it. And I kind of got off the phone thinking, what if it dies with the sister? But then
in
the
a
next day,
month, she can't make a phone call. I mean,
I was like, this is just so cruel how, the waiting and waiting. And then the next day at work, she called me. I had saved the sister's number in my phone. And we spoke for like a half hour. And she just said, how did you find her? And I didn't want to admit that I hired someone because it sounds a little predatory, I guess. So I said,
yeah.
oh, through, DNA and ancestry. And the sister really didn't understand how that works. She's like, I thought those records, like HIPAA, you can't go into the records. And I was like, oh, I don't know how it works. I just kind of played dumb. And she said, I go, I just want to let you know, I don't want anything from her. I hope she's okay. I just want to have a conversation and get some answers and some medical information. I have two sons and medical information for myself. And, if you can get a message to her. And she said, okay. And it was around like Easter. She was going to be traveling to see her. So it was like 3 weeks. And then I remember I was at work and I got a text message from my bio mom
Wow.
saying, my sister says you want to speak to me. Like, what is your birthday? She was verifying some information.
No,
I can
she
only
was the answering machine you left was on your birth mother's number?
not her cell phone number. It was her landline.
Right, her landline. Okay. Had she gotten that message?
I don't know. I still don't know if she ever got that message. Yeah. So this was a different cell phone number, than the number that I had been provided with. And then it was just kind of texting. And I was at work, like trying to do my job, trying to run groups, do therapy with people and like have this all in my head. So there was a point during the day where for 3 hours, I didn't really respond. And she thought I was like just done with her. So she
Yeah.
said, oh, and I was like, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm working because she's retired. And
Year was this?
this was in 2017. So
Okay.
March of 2007, late March, early April. And then it just kind of really didn't go anywhere. It was just texting. I can't talk. My family doesn't know.
Mm.
I asked a lot of questions. She really didn't ask a lot about me. Which now I realize was very like telling of our whole relationship. And that was the summer. It was kind of hard. My husband and I were traveling that summer. We were planning a trip because we had a big anniversary the year before. So we had gone to Spain. And I remember we were in Spain and we're in this beautiful cathedral, like Sagrada Familia. It's
Oh,
beautiful.
yeah. Beautiful.
And I just remember like I've, raised Catholic and very spiritual and God's a big part of my life. And I remember just like kneeling at this altar there and just saying, to God, like, can you just help me with this? Like whatever's supposed to happen with her, you have to take this from me because it's too much. Like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, it felt like a lot of pain, just the limited contact. And we came home, and literally a week later on Ancestry, I get this match from like unknown birth father's side. I'm like, okay, this is weird. It's not on her
Had
side.
she not told you anything about your birth father in your text conversations?
She
And
said she didn't remember. That was so long ago. And I was
Mm.
like, oh my gosh, which
And
I
this is all still text. No, you've never
all
met.
text, all text. So I ended up connecting with someone through Ancestry who is my second cousin. And this person, Judy, my cousin Judy, thank God for Judy. Like, the reason she did Ancestry, it was like something really kooky about like why she has kinky hair or something. And I was like, I don't care. Like, that led me to this. And because my birth father and her mother are first cousins.
Okay.
So she did the Ancestry, we matched, we took it off the computer, and I said, can we have a conversation? Because on my tree's private, it doesn't say I'm adopted or anything like that. And we had this conversation, and we looked at some of the names, and we were trying to figure out how we might be related. And then we figured it out. It was like through a great grandparent. We took that name, kind of followed it. And I said, well, I do know that from my non-identifying, my birth father is a hairdresser. And she's like, well, there's these two brothers. She's like, Frank and so-and-so. She's like, I know that one of them's a hairdresser. And I was like, well, I can't just call up this man and be like, hi, I think I'm your daughter. That's what I ended up doing. She sent me a video. He had done a hair, like a hair show.
Uh-huh.
And I watched that video like 1,000 times. And I was like looking at the video, and I'm watching him talk, and he's got green eyes. And I'm like, could it be, or is it I want him to be? So I had kind of heard him speak and saw what he looked like. And he talked about why he became a hairdresser and how he has a family and put his kids through college. I'm like, he seems like a good guy, not the image I had of the dirtbag that left pregnant mother stranded, And I left a message, I ended up looking him up, got a landline number, and I ended up leaving a message. But the weird thing about leaving the message was that this is all going on when my father-in-law had just died. So we're like in the midst of a wake and all these things. And I'm saying to my husband, Scott, like, I feel guilty for like doing all this stuff while we're in the midst of doing all this. And my husband's like, no, like, his dad had died from dementia and like glaucoma. He was very ill. So he's like, no, you need to do this. Like, he's like, you were able to juggle things. He's like, we'll figure this out. Like, don't worry. Don't postpone this. This is important. So I left the message, like on a Saturday, which was the day my father-in-law had died. Like that day my father-in-law had died, I left the message. And then I didn't hear anything till Monday. Monday, we were in the midst of going to the wake. I'm going to pick up my dad, Dominic, that's raised me, to go to the wake. And like, I'm getting this message from Frank, and he's like, I just left a message saying, Judy's helping me try to find a family member. She said, you're such a nice guy. Maybe you could help me. And he called me back, and I said, what's your cell phone number? Like when he had called me back, and I sent him a message, and I said, this is my name, and I'm looking for, and I told him my birth mother's first and last name, maiden name. And I said, I was born, and here's a picture. Maybe you can ask your relatives if anybody knows. I come to find out he had a very sleepless night that night, trying to picture if he knew my birth mother. Because, it was the 60s. It's like, sex, drugs, rock and roll. He's a hairdresser. He had a lot of relationships and been married 4 times, so he's trying to figure it out. And then the next day he called and he said, do you think I could be your birth father?
Oh, so he thought of it.
I said, I do. So he said, well, how does this work? So then I ended up going to my local pharmacy to get a DNA kit, and they're behind the counter. It kind of took me back to when condoms and things were behind the counter and you have to ask for it. So I'm asking my pharmacy.
I didn't even realize you could get DNA kits at the pharmacy.
They have
I don't think
DNA
I knew
kit.
that either, actually.
But here's the thing. So you get the DNA kit, and I felt like I had to tell my pharmacist, like, no, I don't think that my husband has stepped out and like my kids aren't my kids. My pharmacist is looking at me like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't care. Here's the kit. So I buy the kit, I go home, and I remember texting my birth mother and saying, I have reason to believe that Frank so-and-so is my birth father. And she texted me back and she's like, well, where'd you get that name from? No, that's not him. He didn't have green eyes. He had brown eyes. And, and I was like, listen, I have to go with my leads. Like, all of a sudden, then she was questioning it. And that I remember it irritated me.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be irritated too.
I was like, really? I don't need your help. So I went home to open the kit, and you register online, but you have to go to a lab or a lawyer's office in New York. So I remember making an appointment at this lab in Nassau County, Garden City, close to where I grew up, for an appointment. So I made it for Wednesday because the wake was Monday, the funeral was Tuesday, Wednesday I had off from work, and Friday I was going back to my job. So I'm trying to okay, I have 3 days bereavement. How do I work all this in? And I had messaged Frank and I said, okay, I have the number. It's a kit that you can test 2 people, mother and father. Here's the number you can. And we were planning to meet because he said, I'd like to meet you. So we were meeting for lunch on Wednesday anyway, in his town where he works and lives, which is 10 miles from me.
Wow.
Which is the same town where we go to dinner a lot. It's like one of those towns that has restaurants and shops. And my husband takes the train out of Manhattan and parks his car in that same town. So it was weird.
Crazy.
So when I mentioned about the kit, he said, well, can't we go together? And I was like, is this guy for real? Like, he wants to go with me? So I was like,
so cute.
I was like,
it's cute. It's like an outing with him.
I was like, all right. So I drove to the town. Now I parked my car. He doesn't know what I look like other than that picture, but I've seen that video. So I see him walk. He's really tall. He's like 6'4". So I see him walk by and I'm looking in my mirror and I'm waiting till he gets to the front of the restaurant. I get out, I walk up. I'm 5'3". My birth mother's 5 feet. So it's like,
yeah.
And I remember we go to lunch. I brought some pictures. He's eating his food, enjoying his steak. I can't eat anything. He's asking me like, is your food okay? I was like, oh yeah, I'm just like kind of nervous. When I'm nervous, I can't eat. So we're done eating and he won't let me pay for the check. And I'm like, no, please let me. He's like, no, I have this. So he's like, okay, we're ready to go to the DNA place. I said, okay. So we're leaving. And I said, okay, I'll drive. Because I had made a plan with my husband ahead of time. I said, because he's like, do you want me to go with you? I said, no, I got this. I said, but I'm going to drive. I was thinking he was going to follow me, but he wanted to drive. So I was like, no, I'll drive my car. Because I felt like I'm in a position of safety that I'm driving. He's in my car, but also knowing that I can call my husband if I feel uncomfortable on the way. And we kind of have a code word that I don't feel safe for some reason. So he thought that was so nice, not realizing why I was offering to drive. But then he threw me for a loop. He's like, oh, my daughter lives right here. She's a hairdresser too. Let's just stop and say hello. And I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I was like, but I wasn't afraid. Like, I was like, okay. So we went and I met her. She was lovely. She was like really cool. She's like, I said, it'd be great if your dad turns out to be my birth father. And I said, even if it's not, it's a cool story. And she's like, oh, even if you're not related, you could always come hang out. Like, she was so, I was like, okay, this is nice. And we literally drove to, from Suffolk County to the lab, and he talked, and it was like a therapy session. He just talked about all his relationships and his life. And, I just listened, and I was like, wow, this is a lot. And I remember there was one point where it was interesting. Like, he reached over and he just kind of like went like this to my hair, like just kind of like gently went like that. And I remember I like felt something like almost like an electric shock. Like, wow. That was really intense. Like, I couldn't put words to it, but it was unusual.
Yeah. That's neat.
And then we went
gives me chills.
We went to the lab and we were kind of joking around because it's very serious when you go to the lab. Everyone's in there and they're probably trying to dodge paternity. And we're like skipping into the office, like, this is great. And we sat down, we're filling out the paperwork. And I remember he passed me the form and he was like, can you fill this out for me? I have dyslexia. And I was like, my husband's dyslexic and my son. I was like, okay, this like ding, 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 the light's going off. And even on my birth mother's side, there's some learning disabilities and stuff. So I'm like, okay, like if it is, this is in the genes. Mm-hmm. I'm filling it out. And we went and sat on the it's a medical office. So you're on the table. And I said to the nurse that was going to come in and do the cheek swab and everything, could you take our picture? And I'm joking with him like, oh, this is our first picture for the baby book. Like, we're going to put this in the album, even though it was serious, because I felt like the enormity of it was so serious. I had to put some humor
Lighten
there
it.
because
Yeah.
I was feeling overwhelmed. And I remember we were sitting next to each other, and like, I always cross my leg left over right, kind of like at my ankle part, like the lower shin. And I just kind of glanced down, like he was on my right, and I looked, and he had his legs crossed the exact same way. And I remember it freaked me out that I uncrossed my legs, like, no, it's not going to be. Because there was a part of me that was telling myself I didn't want to be disappointed if it wasn't him. And we had the test taken, and it's a grueling 5 days to wait for that DNA to come through. You get it in the form of an email. It goes to Utah or Kansas or something to a lab. And we texted the whole week leading up to that, how are you, how checking in. And I remember he was very sweet. He kept saying, I hope you get your heart's desire. And he just kept saying, if this is what is supposed to happen, I would welcome that. This would be such a gift from God if, you were my daughter. So I was getting this wonderful reception that I was feeling with my birth mom. And then I remember the day I had to log in to get the ancestry information, when I had called the lab, just to say, like, how do I get this results? The woman on the phone had said, make sure you read it really accurately. Sometimes the way it's worded, it's the opposite of how you read it, because you have to look at the percentages, the probability part. Just go down to that, because it's going to give you all the markers, the DNA markers of where you match. And if you don't match with the person you're testing, it means it's from the other, say birth mother. And she said, and of all else, make sure you put the right password in. She said, because if you don't put the right password in, you're going to get locked out after 3 attempts. I'm like, okay. So I'm writing it down. And I remember I called my therapist at the time, and I was like, I need the session. Like, she said to me, do you want to open it in the session? You could bring your laptop. And I said, no, I think I'll be okay. I said, but I want to meet with you before, because I also wanted to process if this wasn't, and dealing with that disappointment. And once again, that loss of how would I handle that it isn't, my expectation. And went home, tried to log in. It wasn't working. And my husband's standing behind me, and he's going, just breathe, just breathe. He's like, okay, try uppercase. And I'm like afraid, because I'm like, this is the 3rd time. If I get locked out, I have to call them tomorrow to reset the password, like another delay. I was like, what is the universe telling me? Like, this is cool. But it worked. And then it brings you to this page, and it's like, it's a motherless sample. And I was like, oh, right, because it's a kit for 2 people. And then I just read it and reread it. And I kept saying to my husband, it was like 99.99986%.
That's it.
So my husband's like, yeah. I go, it's yes, right? He goes, yes, Anne-Marie, yes. He's like, how many times are you going to read it? I said, well, I don't want to call Frank up and be wrong. He's like, it's right. He goes, he goes, I get it. You need to. So I did. I called up Frank, and then I said, wait, do you FaceTime? He says, yes. I go, let me call you back. So I FaceTimed him, and I said, do you have room in your life to love another daughter? Drop the phone, and then he's like, I want to talk to you, but I got to call my people. And I'm like, I know I got to call all my people, because I had a list of people that were waiting. Where are you? I was like, I'm at my therapist's office. I haven't logged in yet, because I think the results were coming in at 6. And I didn't log in till 7 or 7:30 when I got back from my session. And that just kind of started the whole amazing, like, ups and downs of reunion. And I've had many ups, but also equally many downs, even just as far as the intensity of it and people's reactions.
Did siblings not react so well? Or
I have 6 half siblings. I'm the oldest out of this whole clan, which is kind of funny, because I've always been the annoying baby family. Yeah. And proudly had that role. I met 3 out of the 4 half siblings on my birth father's side. Early,
you met the hairdresser, the hairstylist, the day on the way to the lab. Yeah. So has that been a good relationship?
We don't speak now, really.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, we met. She had a party for her son, a birthday party, and invited me that first year. So that was the year in 2017 that I got to meet 3 out of the 4 half siblings. The other one lives in California, so he wasn't here. And then it just really didn't go anywhere. Like they kind of were on Instagram with me and I followed them, but it wasn't really anything that developed. On my birth mother's side, my half sisters don't know about me.
Mhm.
So that's been kind of a source of, I've only spoken to my birth mother twice on the phone. Once was
Wow.
Thanksgiving of 2018. Very quick conversation, very, first thing she said, first words coming out of her mouth were, "So I heard Frank doesn't remember who I am."
Oh,
And I remember just feeling like my parents are not divorced, my mom's passed, but feeling like when divorced parents bring their children into
yes.
and fight. And I thought, oh, wow, okay. I was like, yeah, I guess not.
it's also
Yeah.
such a guilty mother thing to say too. Like just, I don't know,
Right. I mean,
martyrdom kind of.
Martyrdom.
and I remember it was a quick conversation with her. She just kind of talked about being 19. So that was inaccurate on my non-identifying. It had said she was 21. So she was 19. I don't know why that was changed or how she maybe reported it. I'm not sure. And she just talked about being pregnant, having to be sent to, a home for unwed mothers in Long Beach, which is the town where I was born. And that was it, kind of like hiding her pregnancy in the beginning. And then I guess she said she was a very young, naive 19-year-old,
Mm.
like much more childlike than maybe her age. And that we talked a little bit. She didn't really ask me much questions. And I kind of ended the conversation. I was like, okay, have a nice Thanksgiving. Like, I didn't want to, it was an awkward way to end it. And then we recently had a conversation about a month ago, and it was not a good conversation. It's
Wow.
been many ups and downs of her.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that. That's hard.
It is hard. So it's like that secondary rejection we
Yeah.
talked about, and the expectations. And I think she feels threatened that I have a relationship with her brother-in-law, who
Mm.
is my uncle by marriage, which, when we talk about all those intersectings of how people
Yes.
know each other, Frank has known her brother-in-law since they were 12 years old.
Oh.
So there's intersections with that family. And my uncle Billy was visiting my birth mother in that home for unwed mothers every weekend because the family thought she was staying with relatives in another state. So they set up a P.O. box for her to get mail. And she was pretending she was somewhere else. Meanwhile, she was here on Long Island. So he was there.
Wow.
He was there the day I was born, not like at the birth, but had seen her earlier in the day. I was born like on a Saturday night, had gone to visit her. And they used to take her to lunch and go. There was a beach right there, by the house, and they had done all that. So Billy knew about me.
And you got to know Billy through Frank.
I got to know Billy through Frank, and I
That's
reunited
crazy.
Frank with Billy because one day in conversation with Frank, we were talking about some of his relatives. And when I mentioned Billy and his name, he said, "How do you know him?" And I said, "Well, that's so-and-so's brother-in-law." And he said, "Wait a second." And then he went to his house and wanted to speak to him. And I was like, I didn't know that if he knew. I said, "Don't tell her secret. Like, we don't know, who knows?" Like, so he made up some excuse, but he's not a good liar. So Billy knew something was up, but then he kind of ghosted him for a couple of months, and he reached out to him Thanksgiving of 2017, the year that we reunited, and said, before you even start talking, he's like, I know about Anne Marie. I've always known about her.
Wow.
Like, and I was sworn to secrecy with my then fiance's family. So
Did
Crazy.
Billy know who the birth father was when your birth mother was
yeah,
pregnant?
so that was something that came to light too, is that she's always known it was Frank. There was never any doubt. She said that she had never been with anybody else. The minute that she had missed her period a month later, they were driving out to their house out in the Hamptons and had told them in the car, "I'm pregnant and this is the father." So she always knew.
And she kind of wanted you to go on a different goose chase for that.
Yeah, I think she kind of wanted to deflect from that, not realizing
Yeah.
that I had it not only from ancestry, but also we did that lab DNA testing to confirm that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
And she
really,
kind of talked about that in our texting conversations or fighting, whatever you want to call it. Um, that she never promised to meet me. She never, but that wasn't really true because from the beginning she had said, this is all I can do for now is to text. This is all I can do right now. This is bringing up a lot of traumas for me.
yeah.
And I get it. I mean, I'm a therapist. I do this every day, not just in my work with adoptees, other adoptees, but in people. My specialty is trauma. So I know what she was saying. I understand it. And, in my communication with her, I said, I'm not I'm not going to have the same relationship that I have with Frank. I mean, we talk every day. He lives 10 minutes from my house. Like, we have a very close relationship. I just want for you to want to get to know me. And it sounds like you're incapable or unwilling to do that. So it got to a point where our last conversation, it was a pivotal point of make a decision. And I chose, and I said to her, I'm blocking you on my phone. Like, I can't continue to keep going on like this because it's not healthy for me,
Yeah.
and just even things she would say, like, stop thinking like a therapist and think like, that you would put that back on me. And I was like, okay, but it's not about thinking like a therapist. I felt very much like a parent to her, helping her deal with her trauma. And I
Yeah.
wasn't looking for her to be my mother. I had a mother, Frances. She's passed. That was my mom in every sense of the word. I was just looking to have a friendship or an understanding of
It's a
this is who I,
connection. Yeah.
yeah, just to know where you come from, like our birthright, just to know what our origins were.
Has New York opened up their records yet, or is it still
So
closed?
they have. So the original birth records have been opened. That was
Okay.
something I applied for it right before the pandemic hit and kind of the world shut down. So Governor Cuomo passed it back in December. Legislation finally went through of
Look
2019.
how long that took.
And then
Oh,
January
crazy.
2020, I put the paperwork in to send in for all of those things. And I actually, on my mother Frances's birthday, the mom that passed, I got a UPS package. I remember I was rushing to get to my counseling office in Plainview. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was raining. And like, I should have left by now. And why is it the door's knocking? The dogs are going crazy. And it was my original birth record. And I remember just
Wow.
opening it. And that was like such a grounding thing for me to see my name, see my real name, see that the date was right, that my birth time and,
Yeah.
all that information was right. Because I said, how do I know that's even right? Other things were kind of changed slightly. What if,
Yeah. Yeah. You're real. It's like you really existed.
yeah. And it said baby girl and then my birth mother's last name. Didn't have the birth father's name, just had an asterisk there. I don't know if that was customary in the late 60s that you didn't name the birth father. I'm wondering if she didn't do that because maybe she didn't want him to know because he was of legal age and he would have had to maybe sign off on surrendering. I'm not sure how those laws work. But I remember having it and I remember thinking I had an address where she was living. And I said, I'm going to that house. So that Sunday after church, I called my dad, Dominic, up and I said, he goes, what are you doing today? I said, oh, I'm going to go to the house in Long Beach. I said, I have the address from my OBR. And he said, do you want company? Do you want me to go with you? He says, and we can go to lunch in Point Pleasant after and make a day. I said, yeah. So I picked him up and we went and we found the house and we knocked on the door because I was like, that's so me. I'm like, I'm knocking on the door and see. I'm gonna tell people and see, this is the house. Can you let me in? I want to see. And no one answered. So I remember we went to the beach. It was one house over from the beach. And I love the beach, which that's our connection to as far as me and my birth mother is like my love of the beach and sunflowers. Like I've always loved sunflowers and she loves sunflowers. One of the first text messages I put a sunflower emoji and she's like, you like sunflowers? Like my whole family. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Coincidence. And we were at the beach, my dad and I taking pictures and selfies and all that. And my dad's like, someone's on the balcony. Go back, go back. And he's got me. He's 93.
Oh,
He's like, go back. I'll catch up with you. And I went back and I'm yelling up to the balcony, like, hello, like, are you the owner? And the person's like, no, I rent. Hold on, let me get the owner. He got the owner. I'm yelling up like, kind of the abridged version, very condensed. And he goes, why don't you come in? So I said, my father, they're inviting us in. So my dad's like, all right, let's go. So we went in and I met Debbie and her husband, and they were lovely. And I showed her the OBR. I brought it with me. I showed her some pictures, and she was like, oh my gosh, it's so interesting you came today. We were just pulling out pictures from when we redid the house back in the 90s. They had lived there since the 90s. So they didn't live there at the time when my birth mom would have been there. But she did give me kind of some clues as to that part of town back then. She said it was very crime ridden, a lot of drug use on the beach, arrests. She goes, this was kind of the part of town where the unwanted was sent there. So that made me sad. I was sad for my birth mom to think that.
How she felt, what she went through.
Shame of having this unplanned pregnancy, and now we're going to send you to this place, like to punish you.
How scary.
For your sins that you had this happen to you.
Punish the sin of having sex.
Right.
Is your birth mother a Catholic?
Out of that, right? Yeah.
Is she Catholic too?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was actually.
There's a lot of shame in that.
I was baptized, but she didn't baptize me. So that's still a mystery I'm trying to find out. I was in foster care for 3 months, so maybe the foster family might have baptized me, because when my parents went to baptize me and they were doing the paperwork, they said, well, you can't baptize a baby twice. This baby's already been baptized. We can do a name, a ceremony with the new name that you've changed to Anne Marie. So I don't know. I've written to the Chancery in Rockville Center, and those records are pretty tight. Whatever. They're not giving me that, or there might be a mysterious fire. That was always when I asked for records. There was always these fires all over. Oh, the records were destroyed in a fire.
There's always a fire.
Yeah, like this.
So many records fire. Gosh,
yeah. So that's
this is
kind
a great
of
story.
Estranged from my birth mom, just kind of navigating those relationships with first family, and using that, I guess, in the work that I do, like as a therapist and working with other adoptees. I have that connection, and able to kind of understand the walk that we walk and how everyone.
I love that that's the work that you do now, and trauma.
I know.
Yeah, so I think coming out of maybe my experiences, I mean, I've worked in a group private practice, and just September 1st, I went fully out on my own. I had done mine more part-time. And I think, something that came out of COVID was, where do I see myself?
Yeah.
Getting very comfortable where I was, but I said, no, I think I need to challenge myself. So my practice is a boutique practice, meaning I take on a much smaller caseload. So I'm not doing 40 patients a week and having this crazy, hectic schedule. I do a lot less, and I'm able to pour
Focus.
more on myself. Yeah. And also better self-care for me, because trauma work is heavy work, and adoptee work is heavy. So it's like double that.
They're all heavy.
And I just started recently. I don't know if you're familiar with Adoptees Connect. So
we keep hearing about this, actually.
Yeah, so Adoptees Connect is all over the United States, and they're trying to do international. It's a peer-led, adoptee-centric support group for adults, and they have groups all over. And if there's not a group in your state, you can plant a seed. That's what they call it, planting a group. And Pamela Karanova had started it about 2 years ago. So September 1st, I started co-facilitating with my other partner, Francesca Pagano, that we're doing the Long Island Adoptees Connect. So it's all of people from Long Island. We've been doing Zoom, but we're actually going to have our first in-person meetup, which I'm so excited about. We're doing a walk at Jones Beach on October 24th, and it's a Out of the Darkness Suicide Awareness Foundation Walk, the AFSP.
Yeah.
Because, as we know, adoptees are 4 times more likely to commit suicide.
Yeah.
So we're pairing that 4 times.
Statistic?
That's a huge statistic.
And also Adoptee Remembrance Day, that's October 30th. This is the second year. That was something that Pamela, and that's to honor adoptees that have been lost to suicide or some type of violence by their adoptive families, like murder, or, so we're going to pair that. We're going to make it a positive
Will you send us more information on this
Yes,
so we
yeah.
can post it and know
Yeah.
about it? Yeah.
And people can be virtual walkers if you're not able to join us, in person. I mean, Jones Beach, I've done many walks there. I've done this walk before, the Out of the Darkness walk. I had a friend when I was 14, he was 15, that had killed himself by suicide. So it's always been something close to
Yeah.
my heart, and I've kind of
Was
participated.
he adopted?
No, he wasn't adopted. No.
Well, you're doing amazing work, and like just your story, I think is going to help so many other people process what they're going through. And it's neat that you have the relationship with your biological dad and your other fathers. Your dad is so supportive. I mean,
Yeah,
the men have really come through on this.
men, exactly. Well, I joke with my dad,
Through.
Dominic. I say I've always been a daddy's girl, so it's no surprise. And my father too. I mean, he had a hard time with it initially, and then I think, as time has gone on, he sees that
Yeah.
the benefit, how he said, you wanted this your whole life, and I'm so happy that you never gave up and you found this information.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
What was your birth name, your first name? I know you can't give the last
Tracy,
name.
middle name Jean. Tracy Jean.
Tracy Jean.
Which I've come to find out is a family name, a variation of a family name. There's a lot of Teresas.
Oh, okay.
In
I
that.
like the name Tracy. I was Donna Lynn Dick.
Tiffany Lynn. I'm Tiffany Lynn.
Yeah, it's like we're all in that same generation of those names that you don't. I mean, I think that was weird. I think that was something, growing up, I didn't necessarily like my name Anne Marie, just because people would just butcher it or be like Anna Marie or Marianne, or is it Anne, or I would get so frustrated.
I go by my middle name. I had that my whole life.
I've made peace with that. I think more when I got married and I chose to take my husband's last name, that for me, that was like taking my name back, I guess, a way of just, okay, I have a choice in this. It's not a name that's been given to me or changed.
Yeah.
I actually like the name that my name was changed to. I like Sarah better than Donna. I mean,
yeah,
I like my name too. Well, it's hard to see yourself as different people. Yeah,
I know.
Right. And having that, know that there's that name, but where does that come from?
Yeah.
What was the significance of that name? But also knowing, I think when you do get all the players and kind of your story and know the names, even just like, okay, now it makes sense, like logically. And it's far from saying you're going to get all the answers.
No.
And reunion definitely kicks up stuff that, post reunion, and it's heavy. Everyone thinks, oh, you had the reunion and everything's great.
I know. Sail on.
It's only just starting, it's a little, everybody gets real, and the ups and downs of getting to know someone. It's very intense in the beginning. And I often say to people that I work with, it can't last at that pace of that.
It's almost like a, romantic relationship that like, and then, burnout, reality sets in. So
that's where the boundaries come in. I think that's, Frank and I have spoken about that, and kind of what our roles are.
Yeah.
What our roles and what our expectations are. I think initially, just the point he was in his life, he thought maybe I was going to come in and like save his family or save his relationship with his adult children, because he's divorced from their mother and he's married. And I said to him, that's not my role. My role is not to be your therapist, like get your own therapist kind of thing. I can't, you can't be a therapist to your own family or your own friends. Like you got to do your own work, and set that boundary for myself. I've come full circle in that. I know I'm not afraid of that abandonment, that he's going to go away. I think in the beginning it was, we need to talk so much and have all this contact and see each other because this could go away tomorrow.
Right.
That fear of it's going to be lost.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like, I'm looking for longevity. And in any relationship, you're going to have
you have to have healthy longevity. Mm-hmm.
Healthy longevity. But I mean, I've had really supportive people in my life, my whole life, who, have been there and listened to me and, through all the ups and downs. And I think that's the part, those friendships and those relationships, you lean into those when you're having difficult times.
Well, this is wonderful. I feel like we're friends now. We are that
Long Island connection.
I love that. I love that
Thank
we
you
did.
so much. And please send us the information on Adoptees Connect because I'm
I
going
will.
to in my own state, and we'll stay in touch and we'll.
Yes.
For
And
sure. This has been wonderful,
doing
Marty.
what you're doing, because like I said, just on a personal level, it's so, helpful, but also on a level for other people to reach people that maybe they're not ready to
Yeah.
talk to someone about this, or maybe they're not ready to go into therapy, or they've had experiences with therapists that weren't so understanding. And by no means am I saying you have to have a therapist that's adopted. If you're adopted to go to
No.
that, you don't, because I've had excellent therapists that weren't adopted and they understood all the intricacies of that. So
That's a good message.
Yeah.
Helps out there
Thank
for
you,
everybody.
Anne-Marie. It was
Thank
great.
you, Anne-Marie.
thank you. Take care. I'll
Take
send you
care.
that information.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.